The dust of forward operating base Kestrel tasted of iron and regret. It clung to the back of Specialist Anya Sharma's throat, a familiar grit from a life she thought she had left behind. She stood in the formation of new arrivals, a ghost among children. They were barely 20, all sharp angles and nervous energy, their new uniforms still stiff with factory sizing. Anya, at 38, was a decade or more their senior. Her fatigues were worn soft, molded to her form by years of service the file in the administrative clerk's hand would never fully describe. The clerk, a lance corporal with a face too young to need shaving, called out names. When he got to Sharma, he paused, his eyes flicking from the manifest to her. A brief flicker of confusion before he moved on. She was an anomaly, a data point that didn't fit the curve, and the system had already begun to reject her. Drill Sergeant Gunner Harding watched the new intake from the shade of a corrugated steel awning. His eyes, pale blue chips of ice, scanned the line. He saw the usual mix. The farm boys built like tractors, the city kids trying to hide their fear behind bravado, and the quiet ones who would either break or become deadly. Then his gaze snagged on Sharma. He saw the gray at her temples, the fine lines etched around her eyes. He saw the stillness in her posture, a stark contrast to the fidgeting of the others. He didn't see discipline, he saw weariness. He saw a problem. An administrative transfer, her paperwork said. A clerk, a supply specialist, some rear-echelon soldier who'd been pushed forward to fill a quota. He despised it. The front lines, even a training front like this, were no place for paper pushers playing soldier. The first test was the firing range, the great equalizer. There, the truth would come out. He was certain of it. The range never lied. And he was certain her presence here was a lie that needed to be exposed, for the good of the recruits who would depend on each other to stay alive. She was ordered to the line, a standard M4 carbine placed in her hands. The weapon felt like an old memory, a phantom limb. The recruits on either side of her, a lanky boy named Jensen and a determined young woman named Flores, fumbled with their magazine releases. Their movements were jerky, full of wasted effort. Harding's voice, a gravelly roar amplified by the open space, tore into them for every minor infraction. Anya ignored it. Her focus was absolute. She wasn't listening to his insults. She was listening to the wind. She felt its subtle press against her right cheek, watched it stir the fine, red dust into miniature cyclones 100 meters downrange. A 3-mile-per-hour crosswind, gusting to 5. She'd have to hold a whisper left of center. She checked the rifle. The action was gritty, poorly lubricated. The iron sights were canted by a millimeter, a factory flaw or the result of being dropped one too many times. She made the infinitesimal adjustment in her mind, a calculation as natural as breathing. She observed the recruits' stances, their grips, the way their breathing hitched before they pulled the trigger. They were afraid of the weapon, of the noise, of the failure. They saw a tool of aggression. She saw a precision instrument. She saw Harding watching her, his jaw tight with disapproval. He saw her stillness and judged it as hesitation, as incompetence. He was about to order her off the line, to make an example of her. She could feel the pressure of his stare, the weight of his assumption. But the crisis hadn't arrived yet. All she had to do was wait, observe, and be ready. The dismissal came exactly as she'd anticipated. They were halfway through the basic qualification course. Zeroing the rifles. A simple task. Fire 3 rounds, check the grouping, adjust the sights. Repeat until the rounds land where the sights are aimed. Jensen, to her left, was chasing his shots, overcorrecting with each adjustment until his target looked like it had been hit with buckshot. Harding descended upon him, his voice a thunderclap. Are you trying to wound the target, Jensen? Are you trying to make it angry? He then turned his attention, his fury needing a new vessel. His eyes landed on Anya. Her first 3 shots were a single ragged hole, a 1/4 inch high and to the right, exactly as she'd predicted from the canted sights. She hadn't touched the adjustment knobs yet. She was confirming the weapon's flaw before correcting it. Harding saw none of that. He saw a target with only one visible hole. What is this, Specialist Sharma? He barked, striding over, his boots crunching on spent casings. He ripped the spotting scope from its stand and peered through it. His face tightened. "Are you even trying to hit the paper? Or are you too good to follow simple instructions?" "I said fire a 3-round group." "I did, drill sergeant," Anya said, her voice quiet, level. It didn't carry the required note of fearful deference, and that enraged him more. "Don't you lie to me," he snarled, his face inches from hers. The recruits nearby flinched, shrinking into their gear. "I see one hole. One. The others must be in the damn dirt. You're a disgrace. An admin clerk who has no business holding a rifle. You are a danger to every soldier on this line." He jabbed a thick finger toward the rear. "Get off my range. Now, go back to your spreadsheets and your paper cuts. You are done here." She didn't move. She simply met his gaze. There was no defiance in her eyes, just a profound, unnerving calm. It was the calm of a deep ocean beneath a storm. He was the storm, all noise and fury, and she was the silent, immovable depth beneath. The standoff lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity to the recruits watching. It was the first time any of them had seen someone fail to immediately cringe and obey Harding's commands. He saw her stillness not as insubordination, but as something worse, indifference. As if his professional rage, the tool he used to forge soldiers, was meaningless to her. He felt a surge of incandescent fury, the kind reserved for those who threatened the very foundations of his world. This woman, with her quiet contempt and utter lack of fear, was a threat. He had to break her. He had to prove she was a fraud, and he had to do it in front of everyone. Anya held her position, her hands resting lightly on the rifle. She was cataloging everything. Harding's breathing rate had increased by 20%. A small muscle in his jaw twitched, a classic sign of suppressed rage giving way to impulsive action. The recruits to her left and right had stopped breathing entirely, their bodies rigid with secondhand fear. The sun was climbing higher, the heat causing heat shimmer to rise from the barrels of the rifles, a distortion she would have to account for at longer ranges. Her mind was a quiet, orderly place amidst the storm of Harding's anger. She wasn't defying him. She was processing. She was waiting for the inevitable escalation, analyzing the tactical situation as if he were an unpredictable enemy combatant. She knew he couldn't let it go. His authority had been questioned, not by a shout, but by a silence. He would have to double down. She tracked the subtle shift in his posture, the slight widening of his stance as he grounded himself, preparing to unleash a final, career-ending tirade. She noted the position of the range safety officer, who was watching with wary concern but would not intervene unless a weapon was pointed in an unsafe direction. She noted the location of the other recruits, calculating potential fields of fire and ricochet paths out of pure, ingrained habit. Her world was a constant stream of data, and she processed it all with the same dispassionate clarity. This confrontation was no different from analyzing ingress routes for a high-value target extraction. The variables were different: ego instead of explosives, careers instead of lives, but the process was the same. Observe, analyze, predict, prepare. She knew what would happen next. He would issue an impossible challenge, designed for public failure. It was the oldest trick in the book for a drill sergeant looking to humiliate a recruit. She was ready for it. She had been ready for it since she first saw the undisguised contempt in his eyes that morning. The only unknown variable was the precise nature of the challenge he would choose. The pressure arrived not with a bang, but with a screech of feedback from the base-wide PA system. All personnel exercise, exercise, exercise. Condition red. Inbound indirect fire simulation. Complex ground assault on west perimeter. This is a drill. The announcement cut through the tension on the range like a blade. For a moment, everyone was frozen. Then chaos erupted. Harding's face, which had been contorted with rage at Anya, snapped into a different mask. The hardened NCO. Range is cold. Cease fire. Cease fire. Weapons on safe, magazines out. He roared, his personal fury instantly subsumed by procedural duty. Simulated explosions, heavy concussive booms from powerful speakers, began to rock the base. Smoke pots hissed to life along the berms, spewing thick, acrid white smoke that obscured vision. Pre-recorded sounds of machine gun fire and shouting in a foreign language blared from hidden locations. The recruits, already rattled by the confrontation, began to panic. Their training was too new, their muscle memory non-existent. Jensen dropped his magazine in the dirt, his hands shaking as he fumbled to pick it up. Flora stared wide-eyed into the smoke, her rifle held loosely in her hands, her face a mask of fear. They were supposed to move to the designated rally point, a concrete bunker 100 yards away, but they were paralyzed. Harding was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of furious energy, shoving recruits, screaming instructions. Move, you maggots! That smoke is where the enemy finds you. That noise is what you hear before you die. Go, go, go! But his voice was just one more sound in the cacophony. The exercise was designed to overwhelm, to test their ability to function under extreme stress, and they were failing spectacularly. Colonel Eva Rostova, the base training commander, appeared on the observation tower overlooking the range, her arms crossed as she watched the disaster unfold. Her presence amplified the pressure tenfold. This wasn't just a failure, it was a public one. Harding saw her and his face went grim. His unit looked like a mob of terrified civilians. And in the middle of it all, Specialist Anya Sharma moved with a serene, terrifying purpose. While others panicked, Anya acted. The chaos was a familiar environment. The smoke, the noise, the confusion. It was her natural habitat. She saw Jensen on the ground, scrabbling for his dropped magazine, a perfect target for any simulated sniper. She moved to him, not running, but with a swift, economical glide that seemed to eat up the ground. She didn't say a word. She simply placed a firm hand on his shoulder, a point of solid reality in his sensory overload. He flinched, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. She tapped the magazine well of her own rifle, then pointed toward the bunker. The message was clear. Forget the magazine, your life is more important. Move. The simple, nonverbal command cut through his panic. He scrambled to his feet and ran. Next, she saw Flores frozen in place. 2 other recruits had collided in the smoke nearby and were now a tangled mess of limbs and gear. The pathway to the bunker was blocked. Anya didn't shout. She scanned the area, her eyes piercing the smoke. She saw a narrow drainage ditch that ran parallel to the main path. It offered better cover and a clear route. She moved to Flores, took her by the elbow, and steered her firmly toward the ditch. Breathe, Anya said. It was the first word she'd spoken since the drill began. Her voice was low and calm, yet it carried an authority that cut through the noise. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Follow me. She slid into the ditch, her movements fluid and low to the ground, presenting the smallest possible target. Flores, jolted from her paralysis by the calm command, followed without hesitation. Anya led her and 2 other recruits who had seen her movement through the ditch, emerging near the bunker 50 yards ahead of the main, flailing group. She had not raised her voice. She had not performed any act of theatrical heroism. She had simply assessed the situation, identified the optimal solution, and executed it with flawless efficiency. From the observation tower, Colonel Rostova lowered her binoculars, a thoughtful, calculating expression on her face. Down on the range, Drill Sergeant Harding, having finally untangled the pile of panicked recruits, saw Anya and her small group already at the rally point, setting up a simulated defensive perimeter. He saw their calm, organized state, and then looked back at the terrified, disorganized rabble he was still herding. The seed of doubt, planted by her silent defiance, began to sprout. The debrief was brutal. Harding paced before the assembled recruits, his face a mask of thunder. The smoke had cleared, the sounds of battle replaced by the chirping of insects in the oppressive afternoon heat. He tore into them, his voice raw with fury and embarrassment. He dissected every mistake, every moment of hesitation, every display of panic. He called them liabilities, cowards, wastes of taxpayer money. Throughout the tirade, he never once looked at Anya. It was a deliberate omission, a refusal to acknowledge her competence. To acknowledge it would be to admit his own assessment had been catastrophically wrong. But the recruits were looking at her. Their fear of Harding was now mingled with a new, burgeoning curiosity about the quiet older woman. Kjell Jensen kept glancing her way, his expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. He remembered the firm hand on his shoulder, the simple, clear instruction that had saved him from his own paralysis. Maria Flores watched her, too. She remembered the calm voice, the confident path through the ditch. Anya had been an island of order in a sea of chaos. She hadn't acted like a recruit. She had acted like something else, something they had no name for. Anya, for her part, stood in perfect parade rest, her gaze fixed on a point on the horizon. She appeared to be listening to Harding's tirade, but her mind was elsewhere. She was replaying the exercise, analyzing it. The response time of the recruits was 32% slower than standard doctrine allowed. The communication breakdown occurred within the first 10 seconds. Harding's command style, effective for basic discipline, was counterproductive in a fluid crisis situation as it fostered dependence rather than initiative. It was a dry, academic assessment devoid of judgment. After the verbal lashing, Harding dismissed them for evening chow. As the recruits shuffled away, defeated and exhausted, Colonel Rostova descended from the tower. She walked directly to Harding, her boots making no sound on the hard-packed earth. "Drill Sergeant," Rostova said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "Your unit's performance was abysmal." "Yes, Colonel." "No excuse," Harding ground out, his jaw tight. "They panicked. They fell apart," Rostova continued, her eyes scanning the now empty range. "All except for one," she paused. "Specialist Sharma. Her file says she's an administrative transfer from Logistics Command. 18 years of service, spotless record. Mostly inventory management and procurement analysis." Rostova's gaze met Harding's. "Inventory managers do not, in my experience, react to a complex ambush drill with that level of tactical composure. They do not triage panicked soldiers and lead fire teams through covered and concealed routes instinctively." Harding said nothing. The discrepancy was a glaring hole in his understanding of the world. "Who is she, Harding?" Rostova asked, the question not an accusation, but a genuine inquiry. "I don't know, Colonel," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "But I'm going to find out." His eyes drifted to where Anya was walking away, a solitary figure moving with an unhurried grace that seemed utterly out of place. His dismissal of her had been a mistake. Now his curiosity was a burning fire. He needed to know the truth, and he knew just how to get it. He would put her to a test so difficult, so impossible, that no amount of composure or quiet confidence could fake it. He would put her back on the firing line, and this time the truth would have nowhere to hide. The next morning, the air on the range was thick with unspoken tension. Harding had the entire platoon assembled. He had them run through basic marksmanship drills, his voice even more abrasive than usual, his corrections sharper. He was coiling the spring, tightening the pressure on everyone, but his focus was a laser beam pointed at Anya. She performed the drills with the same detached, flawless precision as before. Every magazine change was fluid, every shot grouped tight, every movement stripped of inefficiency. She wasn't showing off. She was simply operating at her baseline, and her baseline was leagues beyond everyone else. This quiet excellence was, to Harding, more infuriating than open defiance. Finally, he called a halt. "All right," he barked, striding to the center of the firing line. "We have a specialist among us. Specialist Sharma." He said her name with a heavy, sarcastic emphasis. The recruits stiffened. "It seems she finds our basic drills unchallenging." He walked up to her, stopping directly in front of her. "You think you're better than this, Sharma? You think you don't belong here with the rest of these trainees?" "I am where I was assigned, Drill Sergeant," Anya replied, her voice calm, her eyes fixed forward. "Is that so?" Harding sneered. "Well, your assignment just changed." He turned to the range master in the control tower. "Set up the gauntlet." he ordered into his radio. A murmur went through the handful of instructors present. The Reaper's Gauntlet wasn't a training drill. It was a diagnostic tool, a legendary test of skill reserved for Tier 1 selection candidates. It was considered borderline impossible. Specialist Sharma, you're going to show us all what a real soldier looks like. He gestured to the firing line she occupied. The rest of you get back. Give the operator some room, his voice dripped with scorn. The range technicians moved with a grim efficiency. They set up a new series of targets. 10 of them, humanoid silhouettes, placed at varying distances from 50 to 300 meters. Some were partially obscured behind simulated cover. Some were programmed to expose for only a second or two. The rules were simple and impossible. From the low-ready position on the signal, the shooter had 10 seconds to engage and neutralize all 10 targets. 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head was the standard for neutralization. But for the Gauntlet, it was 1 shot per target. 1 perfect shot. 10 targets. 10 shots. 10 seconds. No one at FOB Kestrel had ever passed it. Most couldn't even hit more than 5 or 6 of the targets in time. "There's your stage, specialist," Harding said, his voice low and menacing. "Prove you belong on my range. Or spend the rest of your tour counting boots in a supply warehouse." He was backing her into a corner, offering her a choice between public humiliation and a quiet, ignominious retreat. He expected her to refuse, to shrink from the challenge. It was the sane, logical thing to do. That would be his victory. Anya looked down the range at the 10 targets, silent and waiting. She could feel the weight of every eye on her. The recruits, the instructors, Harding, and up in the tower, Colonel Rostova, who had appeared again to watch. Anya gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She ejected the magazine from her rifle, checked it, then slapped it back into the well with a sharp, definitive click. She checked the chamber, then settled the rifle but into the pocket of her shoulder. She took a single, slow breath and the world narrowed. The other people, the noise, the pressure, it all faded away, leaving only her, the weapon, and the 10 challenges waiting downrange. She looked at Harding, her eyes clear and unreadable. "Ready, drill sergeant." The world fell silent. The only sound was the wind, a low whisper across the dusty range. Anya stood at the low ready, the M4 held at a precise 45-degree angle, her body a study in potential energy. She wasn't tense, but coiled, like a spring. Her breathing was slow and rhythmic, each exhalation a controlled release. Her focus was so absolute it seemed to warp the air around her. The recruits watched, holding their own breath. Harding stood with his arms crossed, a smug, predatory look on his face, expecting failure. In the tower, Colonel Rostova leaned forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. "Shooter is ready," Harding's voice boomed, unnaturally loud in the silence. "Stand by." The word hung in the air. Anya's eyes were unfocused, directed downrange but seeing everything at once. She was no longer just looking. She was sensing. The slight shifts in the wind, the angle of the sun, the precise location of each of the 10 targets were all locked into her mind. A sharp, electronic beep cut through the air. What happened next defied the laws of physics as the recruits understood them. Anya didn't seem to move. She simply flowed. The rifle rose to her shoulder in a motion too smooth to be real. There was no sound of a stock hitting bone, just a seamless fusion of woman and machine. Crack. The first shot was gone before the beep had finished echoing. The far left target at 150 meters rocked back, a hole appearing in its metal head. Crack. Before the first target had settled, the rifle had shifted. The second target, low and behind a barrel at 75 meters, was hit. Crack crack. A controlled pair, faster than a heartbeat. A target at 200 meters and another that had just popped up at 300. Both fell. Her body was a stable, unwavering platform. Her torso barely moved, the rifle pivoting from her shoulders with the mechanical precision of a turret. The recoil of each shot seemed to be absorbed into her body, converted instantly into the motion of acquiring the next target. Crack, crack, crack. The rhythm was inhuman. It wasn't the panic spray of automatic fire. It was a cadence, a percussive beat of perfect, deliberate lethality. 5, 6, 7. A target partially obscured by a simulated window. A target that moved horizontally for 2 seconds. A hostage-taker target with only a sliver of the head visible. All hit, center mass or head. Every single one. Crack, crack, crack. The final 2 shots were so close together they sounded like one, a final, emphatic statement. The 10th target, the closest one at 50 meters, dropped. Silence. A profound, ringing silence descended on the range, broken only by the tinkling sound of the final brass casing hitting the concrete. 10 targets were down. 10 shots had been fired. A wisp of smoke curled from the muzzle of Anya's rifle. She didn't move. She held her position, rifle still aimed downrange, executing a perfect follow-through. In the tower, the range master stared at his digital timer, his mouth hanging open. He keyed his mic, his voice a stunned whisper that was broadcast across the entire range. Time? 9.62 seconds. For a long moment, nobody moved. The recruits stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just good shooting. It was a level of skill that belonged to myths and legends, not to the quiet, older woman who stood beside them in formation. Harding's face was slack, the smugness completely gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His entire worldview had just been shattered in less than 10 seconds. Up in the tower, Colonel Rostova slowly straightened up. She turned to her aide. Her voice was quiet, but it held the cold, hard authority of a diamond. Get me Specialist Sharma's full, unredacted service record. Authorization Rostovi Omega Black. The aide, a young captain, fumbled with his datapad. Colonel, that authorization, that's for? Do it, she commanded. A few seconds passed. The captain's eyes widened. He went pale. He looked up from the pad, his expression one of utter disbelief and something approaching fear. He keyed his comm, forgetting to switch to a private channel. His shocked voice, tinny and strained, crackled over the range speakers for everyone to hear. Colonel, my God. Specialist Sharma's file. Operation Nightfall. Project Chimera. Ma'am, she's... Her call sign. It was Kestrel. The name fell into the silence. Kestrel. To the recruits, it meant nothing. But to Harding, to Rostova, and to every seasoned operator on that base, the name was a thunderclap. Kestrel wasn't a person. It was a ghost story, a legend whispered in briefing rooms and lonely forward outposts. Kestrel was the operative they sent when nations had to be toppled quietly, the Black Ops shadow who had single-handedly dismantled terror cells and rescued hostages from impossible situations. A figure with more confirmed kills than most battalions, whose very existence was classified at the highest levels. Kestrel had reportedly vanished 5 years ago, presumed killed in action during a mission that was so secret it was never even acknowledged. And she was standing on their training range wearing the rank of a specialist. The revelation settled over the firing line, heavy and suffocating. The recruits were still confused, but they could feel the shift. They saw the look on Drill Sergeant Harding's face and understood that something fundamental had changed. Harding stood frozen, the blood drained from his face. He looked at the smoking rifle in her hands, then at her calm, impassive face. He saw her not as a worn-out clerk, but as what she was, a master of his craft, a practitioner of a deadly art on a level he could barely comprehend. The arrogance, the condescension, the rage, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, overwhelming emotion. Awe. Slowly, deliberately, he began to move. He walked toward her, his steps measured, his posture ramrod straight. The entire base seemed to be holding its breath. He stopped directly in front of her, a foot of space between them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw the entirety of his broken pride and newfound, profound respect. He drew himself up to his full height, his back rigid. Then, he executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his entire career. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture he gave to officers. It was the salute of a warrior to a legend. Acknowledgement, apology, respect. All of it was contained in that single, perfect motion. Anya held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slow, deliberate nod of acceptance. She lowered her rifle, placed it on safe, and turned away from the firing line as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As she walked off, Colonel Rostova came down from the tower. She intercepted Anya, her face a mixture of professional curiosity and deep respect. "Specialist Sharma," Rostova began, then corrected herself. "Kestrel. Your file is a difficult read." "My name is Sharma, Colonel," Anya said quietly. "I was reassigned." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a long, painful story. A story of burnout, of loss, of a legend who wanted nothing more than to be a ghost. "Your talents are being wasted here," Rostova stated. It wasn't a question. "Perhaps," Anya replied, her gaze distant, "or perhaps this is exactly where I need to be." She looked over at the recruits, who were still standing in stunned silence, watching her. "They need to be ready. The world hasn't gotten any safer." Rostova nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. It wasn't a punishment or a mistake. It was a choice. The deadliest operative of their generation had chosen to come here, to this dusty, forgotten training base, to teach the next generation how to survive. "Your secret is safe with me, Specialist," Rostova said. "But I don't think you'll be able to hide that kind of skill for long." "Respect is earned, Colonel, not given," Anya said. "Today, the lesson was for Drill Sergeant Harding. Tomorrow, it is for them." She gestured toward the recruits. "And it will be a much harder lesson with that." She walked toward the barracks, leaving a colonel and a drill sergeant standing in the silence, grappling with the impossible truth of the ghost who walked among them. That evening, the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised orange and purple. The oppressive heat of the day finally began to recede, replaced by the cool breath of the desert night. Anya sat alone on the steps of the barracks, methodically cleaning the M4 carbine she had used on the range. Her movements were precise, economical, a form of meditation. The metallic scent of carbon solvent and gun oil filled the air around her. The rest of the platoon gave her a wide berth. The whispers had already started. The name Kestrel passed between them in hushed, reverent tones. They didn't understand what it meant, not really, but they understood the result. They had seen the impossible made real. They had seen their tyrannical drill sergeant salute her. Cal Jensen approached, his steps hesitant. He stopped about 10 feet away, clutching a ration bar in his hand as if it were a shield. He wanted to say something, "Thank you," or "How," or "Who are you?" but the words wouldn't form. He watched the way her hands moved over the rifle components, each piece cleaned and inspected with a surgeon's care. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was a language he was only just beginning to learn, and she was fluent in it on a level he couldn't imagine. He saw not just skill, but a lifetime of devotion to a harsh and unforgiving discipline. He finally understood the stillness he had mistaken for apathy. It wasn't emptiness. It was a deep, powerful calm, forged in crucibles he would hopefully never have to face. He decided not to speak, not to intrude on her solitude. He just nodded to himself and turned away, the lesson learned without a single word being exchanged. Anya knew he was there. She had tracked his approach from 50 yards out. She heard the uncertainty in his footsteps, sensed his desire to speak, and felt his decision to remain silent. She didn't look up. Her focus remained on her task. The respect of the recruits was a fragile, temporary thing, born of a spectacle. It wasn't what mattered. What mattered was their competence. What mattered was their survival. She finished cleaning the rifle, its parts laid out on a mat in perfect order. She reassembled it with the same fluid precision, the clicks and snaps of the components seating together sounding like the final notes of a somber piece of music. The weapon was once again a whole, pristine instrument, ready for its purpose. She looked up from her work, her gaze sweeping over the base. The lights were coming on, casting long shadows. The sounds of the day, the shouting, the gunfire, the engines, had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of generators and the distant murmur of voices. It was peaceful in its own way. She wasn't Kestrel anymore. Kestrel was a ghost, a name in a redacted file. She was Specialist Sharma, and she had a job to do. Her dignity wasn't in her past, but in her purpose. The respect she had earned today wasn't a prize. It was simply a tool, one that would allow her to do that job more effectively. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving her in the quiet twilight, a solitary guardian watching over the sleeping soldiers she had sworn to protect.